the ego is still an expression of the soul. It's part of us that it still is something we have to honor. If you try to run away from it or, think of it as dirty and ugly, that still requires an integration piece for how you show up in life. And I think for me personally, like my ego has helped me survive.
Right.
And took me to different portions of my life where it needed this motivation and like this gratification. So that is something that I think is like a kind of a misnomer of people understanding. And for the ego, there's a false sense of self that is kind of like integrated into that identity, right? Mm-hmm. And we protect our identities to the end, and that is kind of where the falsehood is being presented. We're attached to these identities, these false forms of who we believe we are. And as I went deeper into that concept, I just saw like there is a soul underneath that. And the soul is the truest form of myself that is actually feeding lessons through the false self that I'm supposed to walk through and understand. And I was just seeing like my truth in that, and this happened through a sense of deep meditation. I was just asking myself questions, and I would go into how I felt about, where I'd come at a blockade with myself. And when I came to this blockade, I was like really in a state of fear around my identity. Like I wanted to protect it. Why? Mm-hmm. Why did I want to do that? And then I realized, the soul is actually expressing through this false sense of self, but the lessons I'm here to learn is forgiveness. That is one of I believe my ultimate lessons I'm here to do, and I'm always going to come across things in my life and experiences because I look at my past and every single thing in my past has a lot to do with that.
We need ego. We need ego to keep our shit in check. Because sometimes the ego is the voice that says like, you're jumping out of your lane, like calm down, stay in your lane. So it kind of keeps us middle of the road, kind of secure, in our lane that we're supposed to be in. And then there are appropriate times where the ego needs to like flex to give us that sense of like, oh, I can do this. It's the drive that helps us do crazy things that our sort of normal self would never feel brave enough to do. My belief is the ego keeps us attached to the human form. Like we have our soul, that's our higher self, which is the governing part of this lower self, our body. And the soul is the one that's, pumping out guidance, giving us sort of insight into the experiences that we're having and the lessons that are here for us to learn if we choose it. The ego keeps us in the physical body. And so death to the ego means that we are then really ungrounded, like really detached and disconnected from the physical body. And if we're disconnected from the physical body, we're not going to receive information or insight or guidance from our higher selves, from our, guides and loved ones on the other side, from God. We're not going to receive it in a way that's effective in us for us to learn from it. So I think the ego is something that it's a little skewed with kind of the perception of the ego. We still have to stay and keep it in check, but the death to the ego, I don't believe in that. I think the ego keeps us like on track, on time, responsible. It kind of helps us go through those human tasks of living that we have to do, going to work, paying our bills, following laws. The ego is necessary, super, super necessary, but you have to be, I would say, balanced enough, mind, body, spirit, to know when to override the ego and when to listen to the ego. So it still takes a very connected person to be able to work with the ego the way that it's intended to work.
It's time for Grand Lies.